that was extremely weak.
Yep.
And even I've heard guys like Nick Wright and Shannon Sharp and these other LeBron supporters that are out there talk about the Spurs, but those Spurs teams were getting old. I mean, Tim Duncan was not, 27, 28-year-old Tim Duncan. He was in his mid-30s. I mean, Ginobili's in his 40s now, and that was just a few years ago. So he was an aging guy. Kawhi was a young guy. He was not the MVP Kawhi Leonard. So those were even different teams. And LeBron sort of went through those teams and kind of aged out Wade and then sort of saw the writing on the wall and wanted a better situation. And even in his press conferences in the finals talked about coming back to Cleveland and wanting to play with this young and talented team and cerebral guys like Kyrie and knowing Love was there. So I feel like he's played with talent the entire time. Now, he had a bad break in the finals where he left, but I feel like LeBron has controlled some of those things. But what do you constantly hear? LeBron has no help. And then, so that's where I start to get of like, okay, well, you decided to go to Miami. You didn't have as much control there, but you had your best 4-year run where you should have been 3-1 had they won that Mavericks series, where he's coming back now 4 years in Cleveland and they're 1-3 where he's had more organizational control. So that's where I sort of start to get sideways on, because it's like, well, LeBron, I know you always talk about like, well, the guys that LeBron vouches for, they've got to play better. But again, in getting back to like J.R. Smith, like when has J.R. Smith ever had a point in his career where you were like, that's a guy we got to have on our team? For $5 million a year? Sure, I take JR. For $15 million? Hell no, I don't want JR on my team. Same with Tristan Thompson. Okay, yeah, you're a nice player, $7-8 million a year. Heck yeah, man. What your skill set brings, the defense, the rebounding, the offensive rebounding that he provides for them? Sure, $18-19 million a year? No way. That's where I start to get frustrated. And then LeBron's like, well, I don't have any talent around me. Well, you've kind of priced them out. You've ran off your team. You guys have blown your first-round picks on because you don't have talent. You need shooters. Okay, here's a first-round pick for a Kyle Korver who can only shoot the basketball. I mean, the Warriors just put one guy on him and said, okay, we'll just guard you at the three-point line because you can't do anything. But to get back to your point, I think that's why there's a frustration there, because LeBron has been able to make these moves, certainly from after his Cavaliers move. The last 8 years of his career, he's controlled much of it. A lot of 1+1 deals where he could have walked away and done whatever he needed to do. So to make the argument that he doesn't have the talent around him or these teams aren't that talented, some of that then falls back on him. It's never a question of LeBron's talent, because he's obviously the best player in the game right now. But the argument always seems to come back to, I'm not playing with talented guys, when it's every time LeBron's won a title, he's had two other All-Stars on the team. And I feel like when you look back in history, like when you get back into the days of the Lakers and Celtics, it was a much more compressed NBA. There wasn't the amount of teams that there are now, where, and frankly, there wasn't that much talent then either as there is now. And the talent now just migrates all of a couple teams, it feels like. It felt like those guys, at least were within their organizations, they let them build. And they didn't feel like they had a ton of say, especially early on, where it felt like Cleveland was so desperate for LeBron. And we've talked about them like the guy dating out of his league that's desperate to do anything to keep his girl. That's what Cleveland was for LeBron. They were desperate to keep him. They tried so hard to make him happy. And in fact, they sort of ruined it the first time. And they basically did the same thing this time. They tried so hard. They made all these bad moves. And they basically just didn't have a roster that could compete. So in a roundabout way, LeBron's situation is a little bit different because he's had so much organizational control. But from my standpoint, it's just for the last 8 years, he's had a ton of control. Even in Miami, you see the teams that Pat Riley that are undermanned still perform very well, and he finds a way to get talent on the floor. And I felt like LeBron just kind of bailed on them early.
And to be fair, there's a couple of different facets. I know you hate it when I go into, there's a couple of facets to the argument, because you brought up a lot of good points. But, and again, I just want to genuinely ask you, outside of maybe more recently in Cleveland with JR and Tristan underperforming their deals, has it ever really been LeBron who said, I never had talent the last 8 years? Because I feel like that's media. That's not LeBron.
I feel like
did LeBron ever
every
say
year
he
in
didn't
Cleveland,
have
though, he
talent?
comes out and talks about needing help, needing more from the supporting cast. I feel like it's almost like clockwork where you can set your iPhone to it, especially the last 4 years.
Maybe
in
I'm
Cleveland.
blind to it or earmuffs to it, but wanting to add pieces or wanting to get better, that's every team. That's all 32 teams. They're all looking to add pieces, yet we seem to kill LeBron for it.
Well, I think the difference is from the standpoint of the people that kill it, it's how many teams would like to have a Kevin Love or a Kyrie Irving on their team, and then you're sitting there saying you don't have enough help, and you look at some of the other teams out there who are like, Russell Westbrook's a bad example because he seems to run talent off, but you look at just go through the limit of other teams that would say, oh my God, Atlanta Hawks, they would sell half the franchise to get a Kyrie Irving and a Kevin Love on their team. So I think that's the point of discontent where even in Miami towards the end, it was like, well, Wade's not good enough. He's too old and Bosh doesn't really give me anything. And at that point, LeBron didn't know Bosh was going to have a career basically ending type of injury where that move was probably best for his career, or he would have been stuck there and in big trouble because of the talent around him where Wade was eroding and Bosh fell apart. But even going to that Cleveland team, it just felt like they could never give him enough to make him happy and make him be like, this is where I want to be for the next 4 or 5 years. I want to sign the deal that ends my career here. And like we talked about on Twitter with the deal that he had in place that just gets underreported because it's not a good story for ESPN is all he had to do was commit to this Cavs team for another 2 or 3 years, and he would have had Paul George, Kevin Love, and Eric Bledsoe on his roster this year instead of just Kevin Love. And I think it would have been a much different NBA Finals for him. So that's where I get just frustrated with LeBron of these guys didn't move. They just kind of stayed the course. And, Colin Cowherd could talk as great as Horace Grant. I mean, he makes Horace Grant sound like he's the next version of Anthony Davis at the time. He was a one-time All-Star player. It wasn't like Jordan had 3 or 4 All-Stars he played with. They drafted Scottie Pippen, and they just made it work, and they just filled in with the pieces around him.
Well, look, I mean, I'm on record. I don't agree with Colin Cowherd. I've never said LeBron didn't have talent the last 8 years, so I'm not a part of that group that says that. And maybe I have earmuffs to it. Maybe I haven't heard it as much as you or others have. I don't feel like LeBron has said that. I feel like he's always looking for more, and I think he's disappointed, obviously, with the commitments he made to Tristan Thompson and J.R. Smith and the way that they underperformed. But I also feel like there's a human factor here where I just look at my own life. For example, when I got into the surgical business in 2005, I joined a company with a long-term goal in mind. Now, LeBron moved to Miami with a long-term goal in mind with that ridiculous pep rally where they said not 1, not 2, not 84, not 85, not 174. It was ridiculous. But I entered my first job in the surgical business with that same mindset. And you know what? 8 years later, things changed. And it wasn't exactly the way that I had hoped. And so I made a decision to make a change. I feel like we don't give athletes that same ability when they're free agents to say, I'm going to assess the situation, and I'm sorry, but I thought this situation was going to be a certain way. Things have changed. Ray Allen's getting old. Chris Bosh is not performing the way that he did the first year against the Mavs and the second year, and now Wade is, you got to admit, Wade looked like he was breaking down at that point. Whereas 4 years before that, when LeBron went there, it was all, like I've said before, puppies and sunshine and rainbows. Things do change. I made a change in my job. And once again, I made that change with my heart saying, okay, I'm going to move to this other surgical company. And this is the future I have in mind. Very much the way that LeBron said, my heart is in Cleveland, to bring a title home to Cleveland. So he made that change. I just feel like we do that as humans all the time, but we wreck athletes for doing it.
And again, I think it gets back to the point of anybody else, we really don't care. But when it comes to talking, if Tom Brady all of a sudden decided that this year the Patriots were awful and he jumps on to the next best team, if he goes to the Rams or he goes back to somehow works a deal to go to the Eagles or someone that's up and coming, I think people would look at that and be like, well, that team was already made. I think there's some of that built in with LeBron where, at the end of the Heat run, they weren't a very good team. Like they were kind of running out of steam at that point. But that's what LeBron then makes a move to get to another team that's got young talent. And when you're talking about the other greats of the league, they just didn't do that. Now, maybe it was the timing of it. I mean, Kobe certainly went through a part with the Lakers where that team was breaking down and breaking apart, and he threatened to want to be traded and things like that. But ultimately, they never made that move, and it felt like it just cemented his legacy there that he had 5 with one team. They came back even from the Shaq run and made another run where he got 2 more. And look,
let's also keep in mind
Cleveland's just a bad team in terms of their management too, Eric.
Well, that's a whole other
you and
factor.
I talked about that when he left there the first time. They were a bad team for the 4 years that he was gone. They made horrible draft picks. Kyrie was really the only thing that fell into their lap that they got right. they're a mismanaged team. And that's why I said they're going to be bad now for a long time if he leaves there. So, and that gets us to the next point of where does LeBron go? Because I think part of the problem is I think LeBron's best run was when he was with a organization and a coach where he didn't have as much organizational say as he does in Cleveland. Like Pat Riley was the guy, we're going to do it. No, I can remember LeBron getting mad that the organization cut Mike Miller because it saved him, $6 or $8 or $10 million in luxury tax because he really wasn't doing much and it made him mad where he wanted him just to keep spending. But I think it showed of like, okay, we're here, we're controlling this organization for what's best for you right now because you may not see it, especially now that you have this agencies attached to it. So when we start to look through the teams that are the hot teams for LeBron, obviously the first one that pops up is the Houston Rockets. So Western Conference Finals, have a very offensive-minded coach in Mike D'Antoni, have one of the more analytical minds in Daryl Morey as the GM. So when you look at a team like Houston, you look what LeBron's looking for, what he brings, essentially the organization. Do you think that's a good fit?
No. I think it would be terrible if he went to Houston.
Well then.
No, I'm serious. I think, and you'll get into the basketball specifics of it, but you've got pieces in Houston that are very good. James Harden by himself, very good. Chris Paul, very good. Clint Capella, very good. But the style of basketball that they play, and actually the way I feel about this is supported by Chris Broussard. Watch his take on it. He feels the same way. LeBron will die on the vine the remainder of his career if he goes to Houston. I was actually just talking to a friend of mine this past week about where LeBron should go. He was saying Houston was so close to beating Golden State. And I said, yeah, but that's Houston the way that Houston plays basketball now. That's not the way that LeBron plays basketball. You're not going to add LeBron to a team that's all ISO shooters and expect that they're the same team. So just because Houston was close this year doesn't mean that they would be close again just because they add LeBron. Because I think adding LeBron to the way that D'Antoni coaches, I think it actually messes up their system. So I think it's a horrible fit. What are you going to do? Throw LeBron out in the wing while Harden brings up ISO ball, kick it to LeBron, and expect him to shoot a jump shot with 2 seconds to go? That's not LeBron's game. And so it's a terrible fit.
It's a terrible fit, too, because even from a cap standpoint, when you start to look at him, Chris Paul just came out last week and said, I'm not taking any discounts. Like, he seems like he wants the Supermax. You start to look at his age, and then from the fact that they already have the deal with Ryan Anderson sitting on the books for $20 million. They have James Harden's deal at $30 million. They have to figure out what they're going to do with Capella, what they're going to do with Ariza. It seems like if they want to bring LeBron in, it's going to have to be some kind of sign and trade deal. And then you start to look at, from Cleveland's standpoint, why do they want to take on more money and pay into a luxury tax for a team that's not going to be very good? So they're really going to have to figure it out. And LeBron has been a guy that says for his whole career, or at least since he came back to Cleveland, I want max money. I'm not taking any more sweetheart deals like I gave to Miami. I want to be paid for my services the max money as possible. If that's the case, Eric, I just don't see how Houston's going to be able to work that and put a team on the court with him outside of Harden and Chris Paul.
Well, and I got to say, along the lines of those max money things with Chris Paul, LeBron James, and others, they're guilty because they're guilty of basically sabotaging their own chance at winning more titles by always looking for max money. Look, I know their value on the market, especially a guy like Kevin Durant or LeBron James or Steph Curry. Their value on the market absolutely is max money. But when you're going to handcuff your team that much, then max money is a bad idea. So really, if you're LeBron James and your legacy is going to be affected by how many titles you are, go somewhere and take $15 million. You're in your 16th year of your career. It's one of the things that bugs me the most about some of these veteran players. Well, I'm only going to play for max money when I'm 33 years old. Go win a title or 3 or 4 or 5 by taking $15 million and giving your team a chance to go sign a bunch of young players who could also make $10 or $15 million. It just makes a lot more sense. So anyway, that's my tangent on that. I think LeBron needs to let go of that whole thing.
Well, look what Durant did by taking a discount for the Warriors. It allowed them to bring back Iguodala and Sean Livingston. You think those guys played an important role for them this year? Just that money, like you said, look at Durant's value now in terms of being an endorser. How many Google commercials was Kevin Durant in during the NBA Finals? He's one of their faces for their product. You know he's getting well paid for that. He's got a $300 million deal with Nike that's in place. LeBron has a lifetime deal with Nike for $1 billion. Like, what is $10 million to give up for what he's going to make up on the back end?
Exactly it.
For just his career legacy. I mean, Jordan still makes money for shoes and Gatorade and whatever else he really wants to at this point. So, yeah, I agree with that standpoint right there. Is